All right, bad morning, everybody. Sorry for the delay there. Today is October 9, 2018, and this is Bad Morning News. If you were looking for any negative news this morning, you've come to the right place. Hopefully, it will be informative and not just depressing. Thank you to our sponsor, Brave Browser. If you're tired of the major browsers out there collecting and harvesting and selling your data, give Brave Browser a try. Thanks to them for sponsoring the show. Anyway, if you're interested, give us a shout out in the Discord or in the comments or wherever. Get a hold in that. And I will just say I'm working on getting together some better graphics here, hopefully in the future. Um, uh, Looks like I'm lagging. Um, hmm. Well, I'll just try it out for now and let me know if I'm still lagging. I'm not really sure what the cause is right now, but yeah, thank you to Brave Browser for being our sponsor. Let's see. Yeah, apologies for the format and everything. Just trying to get things going um, from the technology that I have available to me right now. So hopefully it won't be too bad. But thank you guys for bearing with me. So we'll just jump right into it. Today's first article is from the Free Thought Project. This is written by Rachel. Or actually, there's no author given. TV reporter who exposed corruption in the EU found brutally murdered and raped in a tragic and horrifying incident. After reporting on a massive corruption scandal inside the EU, a TV reporter was brutally raped and murdered. This is via RT. A TV reporter who covered EU funds fraud cases was brutally murdered and allegedly raped in northern Bulgaria. The horrific incident is the third murder of a journalist in the EU amid concerns over press freedom. The woman was raped and beaten and succumbed to head injuries and suffocation, according to local media, citing investigators. The victim's cell phone, car keys, and some clothes were not found with her, but the car reportedly was not stolen. Meanwhile, the OSCE representative on freedom of the media, Harlem Desir, called on the authorities to quickly determine if this attack was linked to her work. Some already speculate that the woman might have been the victim of her latest report. She hosted the recently launched Detector program, and its last episode covered the investigation by Bivol website claiming to expose a corruption scheme inside the EU funded projects. Marianova earlier was an anchor of another program called Podium, which aired reports on various topics. TV and the station she worked for said she had never received any threats, and the entire staff is shocked by the incident. Last October, prominent Maltese journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia, who exposed the Maltese Prime Minister's offshore dealings in the Panama Papers scandal, died in a car bomb attack. In February, Slovak investigative journalist Jan Kuciak was shot dead. The 27-year-old was known for his reports on tax fraud and shady dealings of Slovakia's elite, and the police did not rule out that the murder was related to his investigative activity. So that's the first article, basically talking about a journalist who had been reporting on some of the underhanded things going on in the EU, and now she was found beaten and killed. It's really bad news for anyone who appreciates the real journalists out there who really take risks when exposing those in power. And that's how you know they're really getting to the root of issues is when, unfortunately, when it's dangerous. unlike the mainstream media who likes to pretend to be martyrs, but ultimately they're just living in the same elite club as the politicians that they claim to be reporting on impartially, but we know that's not the case, and they're really just their own little clique, and they don't care about the truth. They just care about the money and doing what they're told by the powers that be. But this is something we'll have to keep watching because it's just preliminary information right now. This reporter found murdered, and it would not be surprising if it was linked somehow to her work, but whether we'll be able to see that evidence or not is another question, as it always is in these cases. But I'll go ahead and on to the next article. Is from Activism, and see, civil liberties organizations challenge police use of license plate readers as mass surveillance tool. The Rutherford Institute has asked the Virginia Supreme Court to prohibit police from using license plate readers as mass surveillance tools to track citizens, whether or not they are suspected of a crime. In filing an amicus brief in Neal v. Fairfax County Police Department, Rutherford Institute attorneys argue that Fairfax County's practice of collecting and storing license plate reader data violates a Virginia law prohibiting the government from amassing personal information about individuals, including their driving habits and location. Mounted next to traffic lights or on police cars, automated license plate readers, which photograph up to 3,600 license tag numbers per minute, take a picture of every passing license tag number and store the tag number, date, time, and location of the picture in a searchable database. The data is then shared with law enforcement, fusion centers, and private companies and used to track the movements of persons in their cars. There are reportedly tens of thousands of these license plate readers now in operation throughout the country. It is estimated that over 99% of the people being unnecessarily surveilled are entirely innocent. The Virginia Supreme Court will hear arguments today in Neal v. Fairfax County Police Department. Incredibly, Americans cannot even drive their cars without being enmeshed in the government's web of surveillance. We are on the losing end of a technological revolution that has already taken hostage our computers, our phones, our finances, our entertainment, our shopping, our appliances, and now it's focused its sights on our cars, said constitutional attorney John W. Whitehead, president of the Rutherford Institute and author of Battlefield America: The War on the American People. By subjecting Americans to surveillance without their knowledge or compliance and then storing the data for later use, the government has erected the ultimate suspect society. In such an environment, there is no such thing as innocent until proven guilty. Since 2010, the Fairfax County Police Department has used ALPRs to record time, place, and driving direction of thousands of drivers who use Fairfax County roads daily. License plate readers capture up to 3,600 images of license tag numbers per minute and convert the images to a computer format that can be searched by a tag number. This information, stored in a police database for a year, allows the police to determine the driving habits of persons as well as where they've been. In 2014, Fairfax County resident Harrison Neal filed a complaint against FCPD, asserting its collection and storage of license plate data violates the Virginia's Government Data Collection and Dissemination Practices Act, a law enacted because of the fear that advanced technologies would be used by the government to collect and analyze massive amounts of personal information about citizens, thereby invading their privacy and liberty. The lawsuit cited a 2013 opinion by Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli that ALPR data is personal information that the Data Act forbids the government from collecting and storing except in connection with an active criminal investigation. Despite this opinion, FCPD continued its practice of collecting and storing ALPR data in order to track the movements of vehicles and drivers. In November 2016, a Fairfax County Circuit judge ruled that license plate reader data was not personal information under the Data Act because license tag numbers identify a car and not a person. In weighing in on the case, Rutherford Institute attorneys argue that the history of the Data Act affirms its prohibition on the collection and maintenance of ALPR data by the government. So that article is basically talking about a county in Virginia that is using these license plate readers, and this institute trying to challenge that, fighting the good fight there. John Whitehead. I've read that book before by John Whitehead. It's a really good one about just the encroaching police state and just how gradually things have gotten to the point where you can't even drive. As the article says, you can't even drive anywhere without being known, without being captured on video, and being able to be reviewed by law enforcement without any kind of probable cause of you actually doing anything except existing in public spaces, I suppose. And to me, this goes to the deeper issue of licensing. In my opinion, I think it's a waste. It's just a way for the state to collect money in fees for all this registration and paperwork they make you do and stand in line at the DMV to get. And someone I was listening to recently really put it in an interesting way. When the state has control over who is allowed to drive, aren't they really taking away your right to travel? If someone needs to travel to get to work, and now they can't drive because the government has arbitrarily denied them a license, or they can't afford to pay all the fees involved in getting a license with the state, aren't they denying them a right, a freedom of travel? And that in turn can create more problems in terms of keeping employment. So it's really a big issue, and of course, in our society, we're taught, oh, it's for our protection. If you don't have government forcing people to get licenses through them, you would just have people driving horribly and everyone dying in crashes all the time. And you know, but we know that's just a scare tactic because we already know there's tons of shitty drivers everywhere all the time. I mean, anywhere I've ever lived, there's always complaints about people in this city or that city drive horribly. Well, somehow that's practically every city. Everyone will have complaints. So I don't honestly believe that things would be worse in terms of driver quality, if the government didn't, have us go through the process of licensing, as well as licensing the vehicle itself. I mean, licensing the individual to drive and licensing the vehicle itself are two separate things that just pile on top of each other and make it more difficult to live one's life. Um, I've always hated the idea of licensing. Back when I first started driving, when I was about 16, 17, I got a car that had California license plates on it, and I wasn't in California, and I just instead of going and registering the car and getting the new plates and everything, I was just like, fuck it, I'm just gonna drive with these old plates on it for as long as I can until I get caught, until I get pulled over or something like that by a cop. But I didn't get pulled over in like a couple years. I never got pulled over for having out of state licenses or anything. I guess nobody noticed in that particular instance, because it is ridiculous. I mean, why can't you just transport yourself in this object we call a vehicle? Why does everything have to be traceable? Um, and as we see in the more recent years with technology, it's just becoming totally dystopian, whereby anyone with the right technology and tracking equipment can know where you are at any time, and it's just really not a good look for the future. I don't know if that's radical to say that I would prefer no registration of vehicles or drivers. But let me know what you guys think. If you think that's really overly extreme, if you think that the government has a place in regulating drivers and or vehicles, let me know what you think about that. But I'll go ahead and move on to another news article for today. Alright, this article is from Reason.com, written by Scott Shackford. The officer who killed Tamir Rice found a police chief willing to hire him. It's hard to get rid of bad cops, especially when there are leaders willing to excuse deadly incompetence as an innocent mistake. If you're feeling like a new era of police accountability is coming after Friday's murder conviction of the Chicago cop Jason Van Dyke, a police chief in Ohio is here to set you straight. That same day Van Dyke was convicted, Bel Air Police Chief Richard Flanagan announced that he had hired Timothy Lohman for his force. Lohman is the officer who shot and killed Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old boy, in Cleveland in 2014, just seconds after arriving on the scene. Rice was holding a fake gun, but police said they were unaware that the weapon was not real, even though the person who called 911 in the first place said it might be a replica. A grand jury declined to charge Lohman for Rice's death. To be clear, that was after the county prosecutor actively discouraged charges in the case. Voters subsequently bounced him out of office in 2016. The fact that the prosecutor stacked the deck against justice doesn't seem to bother Flanagan. He told the Times leader that since Lohman was never charged, he was cleared of any and all wrongdoing and should get another chance. But even if one were to forgive Lohman's behavior and not think it's grotesque that Rice doesn't get a second chance to learn why it may be better not to play with fake guns in a public park, Flanagan's decision ignores the reality of why Lohman was job hunting in the first place. Even though Lohman wasn't charged with a crime for killing Rice, he was still fired from the Cleveland Police Department. That's because he had concealed the fact that he had previously resigned from the police department from Independence, Ohio, rather than be fired for his terrible performance record and was deemed unfit for duty. Before that, he had failed a police exam in another Ohio city, Maple Heights. There is ample evidence that Lohman does not have the temperament to be a police officer, and Flanagan's rather blasé attitude about hiring him, he complains that it's not fair for people to crucify him for killing Rice, has left some citizens horrified. This isn't Flanagan's only questionable hire. The chief has also just hired Eric Smith as a part-time officer. Smith is the suspended police chief of the small village of Bethesda, Ohio. The state is currently investigating him over accusations that he misused a police database to dig up information on people for personal use. To judge from the Times leader's reporting, Flanagan seems to have more doubts about hiring Smith than hiring Lohman. He tells the paper that Smith will not be permitted to use the police computers in Bel Air. That anybody would even consider giving Lohman a badge again just highlights how difficult it is to get rid of bad cops. Anthony Fisher noted back in 2016 that Lohman had avoided decertification by quitting his job in Independence rather than getting fired, and that this had put him in a position where he could easily essentially attempt to pretend that he wasn't a problem cop. An additional point of discomfort here: often communities don't know about an officer's bad record because some states conceal this information from the public. In California, the state is finally breaking down a decades old legally enforced practice of keeping records of police misconduct and bad behavior away from the public's eyes and even out of the hands of prosecutors and defense attorneys when dealing with officers who are testifying in court. Here, though, Flanagan knows full well about Lohman's background, and yet Flanagan hired him anyway. All the transparency in the world doesn't help when the people who are supposed to hold police accountable do not. It will probably be up to the citizens of Bel Air to try to hold Flanagan responsible for his reckless hires. So, to summarize that story, a lot of these cops who do horrible shit and get away with it end up just quitting or even getting fired, as in this case, this guy actually got fired and still got hired by some other locality's police department, and apparently he doesn't care that this guy just shot a 12-year-old holding a fake gun. But unfortunately, that's not surprising at all. We see tons of cops doing worse things and getting away with them. Well, not to say worse per se, but many other things, let's say. And usually they don't get investigated at all either. But that's pretty bizarre that the state of California actually prevents prevents the actual DAs and everyone from even disclosing a possible bad record of misconduct of a cop in that state. Just another ridiculous California law when they're supposed to be all happy and wonderful. Apparently, they're protecting cops who shouldn't be hired as cops. So, unsurprising, this case of Tamir Rice was making the rounds a couple years ago. Pretty sad story if you've not heard it, but basically, someone called 911 when they saw this 12-year-old kid walking around in a park. No one else was around or anything, but they saw a kid like out their window holding a toy gun, and the person who called 911 even said that they thought it was a fake gun, but in the video of the incident, it shows the cop rolling up and like immediately firing on the kid, like right as the cop was rolling up and opening his door. The car was still in motion, and the kid was already shot. So, um, yeah, if you haven't heard that story or seen it, you can check that out. The kid's name is spelled Tamir, last name Rice. If you wanted to look that up, or I'll have links to the stories from today in the description later, or on Discord. You could ask me there if you are in the Discord community. I'll check out some of the comments here. Let's see. All right. Fungus was asking if there was a lag. Hopefully, there's not still a lag. But good to see you, Fungus. Good to see you, Danielle. Let's see. Oh, Danielle Hatfield says that's my county. LOL. Oh, great. Yeah. Let's see. Good luck to them since I drive maybe once a week, if that. Fungus says, time to go live in the woods. I agree there. I agree. That sounds like a good idea at this point. That's where you'll find the true freedom, is getting away from all these systems, honestly. I can't think of anything more liberating than that. Danielle says, of course, the UK is far ahead when it comes to tracking people. Yeah, that's what I've heard. I've never been to the UK, but from what I've read, their surveillance system is really invasive and really ridiculous. And unfortunately, there are people in the U.S. advocating that the U.S. follow in their footsteps in having cameras on every street. We saw that a little bit with the supposed Boston bombing. back in 2013. There ended up being a lot of public footage out on the streets that captured these supposed subjects and other things that were never explained by the government that showed that the people who ended up getting blamed for the Boston bombing were likely patsies of the CIA or FBI. But anyway, I digress. Yeah, Danielle asks for the link. Yeah, I will drop that as soon as I get off the air here. I'm not sure if I can. Let's see. I don't want to risk causing lag if I switch around too many sites right now, but I will definitely link it as soon as I end the show today. Danielle, actually, there's no right to drive is considered a privilege, as I have been told. From a legal standpoint, I mean, yeah, for sure, that's definitely what the state says to us. Danielle says mobile phones are far worse where tracking people is concerned. I agree. I agree for sure because people today are used to carrying their phones around everywhere, absolutely everywhere now. And what better way to track people? Um, it disturbs me because I'm not even I'm not even 30 years old, but I feel like I'm in this brave new world where everyone is just being surveilled and tracked everywhere they go because they're voluntarily carrying around a GPS tracking device. And and it's just like it wasn't too long ago when I was a little kid before everyone or most people even had any type of cell phone, let alone a GPS enabled cell phone. And we still used payphones, and the world seemed okay. It didn't seem like we were in desperate need of a tracking device to be carried around in our pockets all the time. But to see how comfortable people have gotten with that is disturbing to me. Yeah, as you say, Danielle can't even walk without being tracked. Exactly. It doesn't seem like the cream of the crop. Gotta wonder why he's supporting these tainted types. Fairfax County has had similar questionable decisions. Things just as bad, let's say. Danielle also says, I should have mentioned that Fairfax County is run by Democrats, by the way. Yeah, thanks for letting us know that. Definitely not surprising. Fairfax County. Yeah, I believe that's one of the more blue, Democratic areas of Virginia, if I'm correct. Let me know if that's off. But from what I've heard about Fairfax County, it's in a, quote unquote liberal area. I lived in, let's see, I lived in Virginia Beach for a short time, and that I believe that's in. Actually, I can't think of the county that's in right now, but I know that's farther south than Fairfax County, I believe. Um, and that was an interesting time. Let's see. All right, I have another article from Reason. And this is kind of another uh, college campus um, type issue, SJW type things going on with all of these college campuses now. But this article is from Reason.com, written by Robbie Suave. Two students hooked up. It was clearly consensual. He still spent $12,000 defending himself. A brief romantic encounter at UC Davis triggered a Title IX investigation after the female student changed her mind about it weeks later. James, a freshman at the University of California, Davis, was on his way to math class when he received an email that would derail his life for the next few months. The university's Title IX office, which handles sexual misconduct disputes between students, was investigating a complaint against him. This was in February 2018, at a time of heightened public attention to the problem of predatory men taking advantage of vulnerable women. Journalists had exposed Harvey Weinstein, Al Franken, Louis C.K., Kevin Spacey, Roy Moore, and others for committing a variety of sexual misdeeds. This was not a good time to get accused of something like this, James tells Reason. The email from the Title IX compliance officer went into great detail about the seriousness of James's situation. He would be investigated in accordance with the university's sexual assault and sexual violence policies, as well as the student code, which covers physical assault, threats of violence, and conduct that threatens health and safety. A finding of responsibility could result in suspension or even expulsion. But the email was short on details of the alleged misconduct. According to the Title IX office, a female student, Becky, had complained that James touched her on her breasts and buttocks over and under her clothing without her consent. I am using pseudonyms for both James and Becky. James knew Becky. They had been classmates in a drama class and very briefly friends. On the evening of October 20, 2017, they had met up with some other friends to play music. Eventually, finding themselves alone in Becky's dorm room, they kissed for a few minutes and engaged in some lightly sexual touching before other students interrupted them. In James's view, the encounter had not only been fully consensual, it was also mutual. Becky bore just as much responsibility for initiating it as James, and as Becky would later make clear to the investigator, she had also touched him sexually. She explicitly described her own actions in her official statement. Becky's account of the incident, as set forth in the summary of her investigative interviews, does not, on its face, allege any act of prohibited conduct. James's attorney wrote in an April 11 letter to Wendy Dalmendo, UC Davis's Title IX coordinator. Even if everything Becky alleges is true, my client clearly did nothing wrong and did not engage in prohibited conduct. And yet the investigation continued until May 1, at which point the Office of Student and Judiciary Affairs finally concluded that James was innocent. Even so, Becky was afforded the opportunity to appeal the decision, consistent with university policy as dictated by the Obama administration's Education Department, which had obligated college administrators to give accusers the option of appealing adverse findings if they granted this right to the accused. I've covered dozens of Title IX cases involving dubious sexual misconduct allegations, unfair judiciary procedures, and life-ruining consequences for the young men involved. James' situation is different. He was cleared and is now enjoying his sophomore year at UC Davis. In some sense, the process worked. Even so, James had to spend most of a semester fearful that his life as he knew it was about to end, that his name would become synonymous with the evil men of #MeToo. He had to recount the intimate details of an amorous encounter to university administrators, a lawyer, and his parents, and his family shelled out $12,000 in legal fees. We're not a rich family, so that made a sizable debt, says James. Tuition for UC Davis is around $16,000 a year. This was almost another year of college. This was the cost of successfully defending against a sexual misconduct allegation that wasn't even really an allegation of sexual misconduct. The joke around here is everybody goes to UC Davis because they got rejected from Berkeley, James says. But really, what drew me to Davis is I have a decent amount of family in the area. I've warmed up to the campus. James is a California native. His mother is an immigrant from Asia, and his father is a native-born American. He had a long-term girlfriend for 2.5 years during high school, but they broke up when he went away to college. In a lengthy interview, James shared the story of his encounter with Becky and the subsequent Title IX investigation. I also reviewed UC Davis's 130-page report on the incident and all relevant text messages the two students exchanged. They were included in the report. To avoid causing Becky to take any further action against James. I did not reach out to her for her comment, though her summary of what transpired is included in the report. Becky and James largely agree on what happened according to the report, and their recollections barely diverge. James and Becky were enrolled in the same acting class, and they enjoyed performing in scenes together. On October 19, they began exchanging text messages and agreed to meet outside the classroom. Becky promptly steered the conversation in the direction of sex. She told James about a safe sex information session being hosted in her dormitory building. She proposed condoms and dental dams as two of the things that might be discussed. She then explained the function of a dental dam to James. At dinner, the two continued to discuss sex, how they had lost their virginity, previous relationships, and what kinds of things they enjoyed. Eventually, James accompanied Becky to the safe sex informational session, but Becky's other friends were there. Feeling out of the loop, he left. The next day, they attended an improv show together with some mutual friends. For a group of musically inclined students who had met in an acting class, it was a fun night. We're all improv comedy acting students, so we were amped, says James. Afterward, they headed back to a commons area in Becky's dormitory building, a group of 10 people or so, to play music. James played the guitar, Becky played bass, guitar, and cello. This went on until midnight, at which point James helped Becky carry her instruments back to her room. She showed him around, and instead of rejoining the group, they started chatting. We keep talking for maybe 5 minutes. Turns into 6, turns into 7, 8 minutes. He says, I didn't want to leave, and I don't think she wanted to leave. The conversation came to a halt, and according to James, Becky leaned in as if she wanted to kiss him. He met her halfway, and they kissed. According to Becky's complaint, the kissing followed a night of mutual flirting and started out romantic. Eventually, she either asked James to close the door or closed it herself. They continued kissing and also touching as they grinded against each other. I got my hands on her back and I was like, wow, we're starting to get frisky, says James. My hands start making my way up her back, slowly, respectfully testing the waters. James opened his eyes to make sure Becky was enjoying what was happening. She seemed into it, and so he touched her breasts and her butt over her clothes. James removed his shirt, and according to Becky's account, she told him to drop it on the floor. Let's see, I don't necessarily need to read this entire thing here. That's not this kind of show, but I'll definitely have a link to this article if you want to read the whole thing. But it's basically making the point that, I mean, as it said, it seemed like, yeah, I mean, this guy was blindsided when he had no indication that what was happening was not consensual, and all of a sudden he gets the news from his administrators at his college that, hey, you're under investigation now for sexual assault under, these fake made up rules instituted by the university, and not even under, due process of law. It's, as was stated in the article, Obama instituted his policies that really forced colleges to take on more than they're really equipped to handle. I mean, they're not there to adjudicate assault, this isn't an administrative thing. If someone has a complaint, they should be taking it to the police, not to the college. The college isn't there to decide who's guilty and who's not. And unfortunately, that's happened in many cases where students, mostly men, have gotten kicked out of school, um, have shelled out lots of money, and have had, all their hopes and dreams ruined by allegations that aren't being adjudicated on any sort of due process standard. But unfortunately, this guy shelled out a lot of money, apparently $12,000, just to keep himself from, becoming another one of those guys being kicked out of school based on what seems like nothing, even according to the person who filed the complaint. So, yeah, I mean, this guy is in a position where he's lucky for not getting kicked out. You know, the article said he's still in school because most of the time you see these stories that the guys end up getting kicked out. But as it said, really expensive and over what? I mean, honestly, it's very sad. It's very sad to see. And if I had a younger, like, relative who was going to college, I would warn them. I mean, it's a really dangerous place that we're in culturally, as referenced in the article, that this happened earlier this year when all kinds of stuff was coming out about people, not people in college, but these celebrities who we should know by now are all pretty sick people, all these Hollywood types and whatnot. But yeah, so I'll drop the link to that. Let me know what you think about that, and I will read a couple more comments here. Danielle Hatfield, you are correct. Virginia is under the thumb of the Democrats. Tim Kaine and Mark Warner are our senators. Uh, yeah. Yeah, I've heard about Tim Kaine. um, yeah. LOL, we get the picture. Yeah, good. Yeah, I didn't realize it was going to go into that much detail, but yeah. Danielle says, sounds like Becky got petting remorse resulting from gross immaturity. Sounds like it. Dangerous Times also is absurd, of course. And thank you for your comments as always, Danielle. And let's see, I think I have another article here. Okay, I have another article from Activist Post here. Is titled Epic asks Senate to probe her protection nominee on facial recognition drones. As we've been covering with increasing frequency as of late, the Department of with Customer Protection, CBP, has made it known that their mandate to bring in facial recognition as part of a biometric identification system for travelers is to begin full rollout. There are still many questions surrounding the scope of the program, as well as full transparency surrounding what is to be collected and how long that data will be retained. The Electronic Privacy Information Center is now calling upon the Senate to do its job and ask the proper questions for the nominated head of CBP, Kevin McAleenan. You can read their suggested questions in the press release below. We'll see if new answers emerge or are compelled to be given where only secrecy and speculation have been appeared thus far. Epic has sent a letter to the Senate Finance Committee with questions for the next Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. The committee will consider the nomination of Kevin McAleenan to head the CBP at a hearing this week. Epic raised questions regarding 1. Whether Kevin McAleenan would use DACA data for purposes unrelated to DACA eligibility, 2. CBP's use of facial recognition technology, 3. CBP's collection of social media information, 4. CBP's proposed exemption of Privacy Act safeguards for a new agency database, and 5. CBP's use of drones to conduct aerial surveillance on American citizens. Epic asked, how will CBP ensure that the collection and use of biometric data will not expand beyond the original purpose? And will CBP link images collected by drones with facial biometrics in CBP or DHS databases? Epic has submitted comments to DHS and CBP concerning They're a collection of social media information. Epic also has filed a FOIA lawsuit seeking documents on CBP's biometric tracking programs, and Epic's Jeremy Scott has written an op-ed for The Hill about CBP's use of facial recognition technology. So basically, as we know, lots of facial recognition being used around the country, especially around the border. And basically, they're apparently now using drones to surveil people along the border as well. And it's not a surprise since they've long declared any area near any border to be basically a constitution-free zone where they declare the right to search and seize your property at any time just because you are trying to go over to another country across the border and do whatever. They pretty much have the right to force you to give up your passwords to your phones and laptops and will search it at will. And I don't know, just the idea of crossing over borders seems really dystopian nowadays. I haven't personally tried, going over to Canada or going over to Mexico, really. But I imagine it's an irritating process most of the time. A lot of unrelated things get taken into account. I know people who get DUIs on their record, even if they're not convicted. I know of people who have wanted to go to Canada, for example, on vacation or whatever, and they're not allowed to go over to Canada just because they have pending DUI charges in the U.S. So I don't know. It's just really bizarre. It's really irritating trying to deal with travel these days. I personally haven't even taken an airplane in about 11 years just because I hate the idea of being subjected to all the TSA garbage that they do now, the body scanning things that X-ray you and inject radiation to the areas surrounding your body and potentially can cause cancer and other problems, but the government doesn't really care about that because they're too busy presenting security theater, even knowing that people are able to get away with smuggling things onto planes. There are videos of people who've been able to sneak weapons onto flights, even with going through the body scanner and going through pat downs. But yeah, I don't like traveling anymore. Unfortunately, when I was a kid, I traveled quite a bit. But lately, I only ever drive or take trains now, and those aren't perfect either. But at least the trains haven't gotten quite as authoritarian and Orwellian as air travel has gotten in the past decade or so. But I wouldn't be surprised if they crack down on that as well. There's been talk of it um, getting even more strict with the Amtrak trains, for example. Um, but yeah, as we know, they'll do anything to crack down. Let's see. I have one more article today from Free Thought Project. Police forced to capture it on them and attack and is written by Matt Agrist. A department with a history of shooting their own canine units has shot another dog after it attacked one of their own. Waco, Texas. As the Free Thought Project has consistently reported, police canine units have attacked everyone from babies to the elderly to everyone in between. Most of this is done without consequence, and a case out of Texas shows literally anyone can fall victim, including the very officer tasked with handling the canine. On Friday, police were serving an arrest warrant at a North Waco home around 12:30 p.m. The officers became involved in a standoff with the suspect who was not even in the home. During the time police were attempting to enter the home, the canine turned on his handler and began to attack him. As the dog was biting his handler, the officer's partner pulled out his gun and shot the Belgian Malinois. At that point, another officer on scene was forced to put down the canine to save the officer. Officer Garin Bynum said. The other officer at the scene was forced to put down the canine to save the officer. The handler, who is also a Waco PD officer, was sent to the hospital with minor injuries. As statement from the department read, the dog could have killed him, witness Larry Dobbins said, according to KXXV. I agree what he had to do to the dog. He didn't want to, but it happened. Police ignore the officer involved in the shooting. However, the Waco Police Department has had 3 dogs in its canine unit: Castor, Kempe, and Hondo. What's more, the police never found the suspect who was the subject of the warrant. In 2015, an innocent child mauled by a canine in an innocent child was mauled by a canine in Waco. Instead of retiring the dog, the department kept after just a brief time in quarantine. And this was in spite of the fact that Officer Joseph Ballou caught training the canine named Ace to be aggressive and vicious. After an internal investigation conducted by the McLennan County Sheriff's Department, Ballou was formally reprimanded but was able to keep his job and faced no legal penalties. In 2001, another Waco police officer shot and killed his canine partner when the dog attacked another officer who had come up on it from behind, reported the Waco Tribune Herald. Also, just last month, a police officer in Columbus, Ohio, was forced to shoot his own canine after it attacked him. As the AP reported, the dog, a 3.5-year-old male Belgian Malinois named Benzie, was euthanized by a veterinarian. As the Free Thought Project has reported, not only are police dogs often responsible for vicious attacks that either go far beyond what was necessary to subdue the suspect or leave innocent bystanders with severe injuries, but the dogs themselves are of abuse at the hands of police officers. The use of dogs in police business is inhumane, both for the animals and the suspects who they are often unleashed on. Our society shuns animal abusers and people who raise dogs specifically for fighting, and rightfully so. But how are police dogs any different than an attack dog, than a street gang that a street gang breeds to be as aggressive as possible for the purpose of winning money in dogfights and intimidating rivals? In many cases, these animals are often treated as nothing more than disposable weapons by the police that are in charge of caring for them. In fact, it is sadly common for police officers to get accused of animal cruelty or neglecting their dogs. Just this week, the Free Thought Project reported that an officer was caught on video abusing his own search dog when the animal failed to signal for drugs at a traffic stop. It is also common for police to leave their dogs in hot cars for extended periods of time until they die. In a recent case out of Indianapolis, as the Free Thought Project reported last week, an innocent pregnant mother was brutally attacked by a police canine. The case became even more disturbing after a U.S. District Court judge ruled that the woman's rights were not violated because she was an innocent bystander during the incident. And that's the end of that article. Yeah, I personally hate the idea of animals being used by cops and by military in all of these types of things, and I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be considered abuse. The same way the article mentioned, as people who breed them for dogfighting or anything else, they're being used by the police and military to do their dirty work in some cases, and they end up just being used as tools. I know in the military they train dolphins to search for bombs and other munitions, mines underwater, and I don't even see why someone would feel the need to put an animal in that position. I mean, with all the money that the government pours into the military, you'd think they'd have other technologies for that, and I'm sure they do. But it's like on top of that, they have to also add in dolphin training and, risk the dolphins' lives when they're not involved in any of this. It's not the dolphins' fault that people decide to, engage in all this ridiculous warfare and create weapons that kill people and kill animals. I just find that really disgusting. Involving animals, even seals. One documentary I saw even showed them training seals to search for explosives underwater. It's like, why would you do that? But yeah, I mean, not surprising to hear that cops are abusive towards their own canines in cases where they don't alert for drugs. I'm sure they have an interest in getting these drug sniffing dogs to alert to drugs because they can then search the car and civil asset forfeiture, as we know. But it's all around pretty terrible. And at the end there, it mentioned a case where a woman was attacked, but she gets no recourse because she wasn't the suspect involved in that case. So apparently, it's all well and good that the police canine attacked her because she just happened to be there, as opposed to being the suspect. So, what are you gonna do? Um, exactly. Let's see. And I'll check out some comments here. I think it's loading pretty slowly here. Let's see. Sorry, this comment thing is not cooperating with me right now. Danielle says, I avoid traveling myself. It is a big hassle. At least we don't have to be pat down yet to drive our own cars. Exactly. Yeah, I think that day is coming soon. And especially with all the DUI checkpoints, that's pretty similar practice. Um, Danielle says, sounds like Waco has a canine training problem to me. Perhaps that breed shouldn't be used too. Her rights weren't violated because she was an innocent bystander. What sense does that make? Yes, the issue of using animals is questionable. I totally agree, and thank you so much for your comments, Danielle, and thank you to Fungus also in the comments, and thank all of you for being here today. Thanks for sitting through some bad news, but hopefully you'll have a little bit of information that you won't hear on the Good Morning America type shows out there. Just to reiterate, if anyone out there is interested in hosting the show, give us a shout out on Discord or in the comments. Um, let's see. Any other housekeeping notes? Yeah, I guess that's a good place to wrap up. This has been Bad Morning News, episode 57. Screw the state, fuck the system. Bad morning, everybody. Have a good one.